Chapter 50. Leaving the Old Stone. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Quickly, Elena's messy room was lit up by the first rays of the day's sunlight. At that moment, Minos was lying with a beautiful young woman hugging him while resting her head on his chest. Minos opened his eyes gradually as he yawned. He then recalled his activities with Elena last night. They spent most of the night playing with each other, so the young steward was still sleepy. Shortly afterward, Minos slowly got out of bed, trying not to wake the sleeping beauty, who was hugging him. He then went to the bathroom next to the room and took a nice cold shower to wake up completely. After a few minutes, he came out of the bathroom with wet hair and a white towel around his waist. At that moment, the beautiful blonde, who was asleep, woke up and started looking at Minos with a smile on her face. "Good morning. Are you leaving?" "Good morning. Yes, I will be leaving soon. I have to resolve some issues before leaving the Old Stone City," Minos said as he started to put on his clothes. Elena got up from the bed and approached Minos. After that, she started to help him button his shirt. "Oh. So, you're leaving today? Well, the next time you come here, don't forget to come and see me, hee. You can go to the Black Plain too. It won't be long before that place became the best part of the north of the central continent," Minos said with a confident smile on his face. "Who knows, maybe in the future I will go with Elin sometime," she said as she brought her red lips closer to Minos's mouth. They kissed for a few seconds and then said goodbye. After that, Minos went towards where his carriage and his soldiers were waiting. "Good morning guys, let's go back to the Hotel Olsen." It didn't take long, and Minos's group arrived at the hotel. When they arrived at the apartment that had been rented, the rest of the soldiers were already having breakfast, and Ruth was sitting in a chair while she was drinking a cup of tea. I thought you weren't coming back," she said in a disgruntled manner. I'm sorry for making you wait for me. But today, we are going back to the Black Plain, so you better get ready soon." "Back to the Black Plain? Now that you have settled your affairs, wouldn't it be better to head towards the Cromwell Kingdom?" she asked, looking into Minos's eyes. "Of course. I will only go to the Cromwell Kingdom when the spiritual tournament is 1 or 2 months away. There is no reason to go there anytime soon, and I have a lot of things to do in the meantime." Minos did not consider this competition a priority in his plans. It could contribute to his plans for the Black Plain business, but that was just an initial contact with possible allies. However, solving the population problem in his territory was the priority for Minos. So, he was not worried about that competition. Okay. Minos' group left to collect the last batch of spiritual pills not long after. That was the only thing that kept them from leaving, so they were really looking forward to it. "Mrs. Vera, are my pills ready?" Minos asked a middle-aged woman, who was behind a counter in the store where he had just entered. They are ready. "Young man, wait a minute while I bring them here," said the lady when entering a room that was next door. It didn't take long, and the middle-aged woman returned with a medium-sized bag in one hand. "Here, if you need anything more, just talk. Thanks, but that's all I needed." After that, Minos left the building and returned to his carriage. He could finally go back to his territory. While traveling through the city, Minos' group was suddenly stopped. "Sergeant Pike, what happened?" "Young master, there is a Nash family carriage in front of us. I believe they want to talk to us," Pike responded quickly. Shortly afterward, the young Elin got out of her carriage and headed towards Minos and his group. She smiled and said, "Are you going back to Plain Black now?" "That's right," replied Minos. "Well, I have some business to attend to in the Kingdom of the Waves, so I was just thinking of traveling with your group." "Okay," Minos said with a smile on his face. It didn't take long and Elin and her bodyguard, Edouard, followed Minos' group in a different carriage. "We have to pass the western exit of the Old Stone City. I left my spiritual beast staying in that place. Ruth said after the group continued on their way to leave the city. Okay. Not long after, the group was heading towards the city of Portland while a great white eagle flew across the skies, chasing the chariots of the Minus group. Meanwhile, in the maritime city, 3 people were revisiting the places where the young Daryl had passed before he died. They had just arrived from the Silva family headquarters, where they had received an order to find out what had happened to their young master. Of these 3, 2 were at level 48 and 1 at level 49. They would hunt and capture those responsible for Daryl's death in an attempt to alleviate the loss of his family. At that moment, they were passing by the hotel where the young Daryl had stayed during that trip. The 3 were in a room, while the strongest person was sitting on a sofa, receiving the report from the other 2. The only woman in the group, who was relaxed on the sofa, said, "So, Dennis, what did you find out?" "Miss Sarah, I heard that the young master had participated in an auction just before leaving this city to go to Stone Island. But at this auction, it seems that he disagreed with one person. He revealed his identity to prevent that person from bidding on a certain item anymore. But he was unsuccessful." A man with half gray hair, half black, replied. At that moment, the blond man said, "I also found out that the young Master Daryl's group tried to chase that person's footsteps before they left the city. But I was unable to discover the identity of the other group. This was normal. The Protector Philip had only recognized Minus' identity because he was the guard who accompanied the young Daryl in his time at the Spiritual Academy. And as Minus and Daryl were only 1 year apart, the 2 ended up attending many occasions simultaneously. And because of these occasions, Protector Philip knew Minus's appearance very well. But for other people, it would not be easy to identify the young Stuart. That's because he wasn't someone who tried to get a lot of attention when he was young, and stronger people, like these 3, certainly didn't give a damn about the identity of a young man outside their family or the other great noble families of the Brown Kingdom. Because of this, the number of influential people who could recognize Minus in the 3 great families of the kingdom, Silva, Brown, and Miller, could be counted on the fingers. And as for the people who knew Minus' name, well, they were all on Stone Island, and the chances of them being questioned would be very low. That's because the city of Portland was much bigger than the maritime city. With that, the investigation group could only track Minus through Daryl's tracks, but not from its own tracks. At least it wouldn't be easy for them to come up with the young Stuart's full name. After all, how many Minus could there be in the spiritual world? The woman who was sitting then got up and said, "Since we have achieved nothing here, we are going to Stone Island. But this is going to be problematic." She let out a big breath and headed towards the port of the maritime city, where the Silva family had their boats at their disposal. "Ah, this job may take months," Sarah Silva lamented to herself. Meanwhile, in the border region of the Kingdom of the Waves with the Black Plain, a beautiful fox with 5 tails was lying on the floor of the cave that she had previously found. If someone looked closely, he could see some blood coming out of her bottom, just below her tails. There was a pink bubble emerging from the body of this female fox as if it were an egg. But this was not an egg, but the little fox, which she had been preparing to give birth to. "That's right, my baby, it's time to meet mommy," the fox said in a voice full of love while breathing irregularly. Shortly after that, a little fox with 1 tail, covered by a thin membrane, appeared entirely outside the mother's body. The mother then quickly began to lick her newborn daughter, eating the membrane that protected her and the placenta close to her cub. It didn't take long, and the little fox was nestled with her mother after being cleaned by the big fox. Chapter 51. Passing through Portland. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A few days passed since the group of Minus had left the capital of Stone Island. At this time, they were arriving in the city of Portland, from where they could return to the continent. Minus wanted to see if any of the alchemists and array masters, with whom he had spoken previously, would change their mind and decided to come with him. It would be perfect for the Black Plain if any of these specialists came with them. Minas could pay a subsidy for these specialists, and then they could sell their products within the dry city at a low price. That's because any pill or spiritual array would be very expensive for ordinary and weak people, as was the majority of the population under the territory of Minas. The group then slowly entered the city of Portland, heading straight for the local alchemy guild. Of all the people Minas had spoken before, the most promising of them seemed to be the alchemist Davis. After a while, the group finally arrived in front of a rectangular building, a strong medicinal smell. This was the Alchemy Guild of the city of Portland. Minas immediately entered the building and went straight to the second floor, the place where grade .1, high level, alchemists did their business. He then looked for the alchemist Davis's bench, in the place where he had seen it before. Soon, Minas saw the person he was looking for on a low traffic bench. "Alchemist Davis, it's good to see you again." "Well, I'm here doing what I said earlier." "And then? What did you decide?" the young steward said, with a smile on his face. The middle-aged man at the bench looked at Minas for a second while he tried to remember. Then he finally said, "Ah. So, it's you. I didn't think you were really going to be here again." He then continued. "Your offer was very good, but I don't know if I will be able to do business in the dry city. Ordinary people don't have that many crystals to buy spiritual pills." Minas understood Davis's doubts and then said, "You are kind of right. Indeed, a common population, such as that of a city like the dry city, could not buy pills, arrays, or spiritual weapons. And part of the inhabitants of my city, it will really take a long time before they can buy these items. But the soldiers in my army will be able to," Minas said with a confident face. "I will not go into details since you are not yet a member of my forces. But rest assured, the numbers of soldiers who can pay for the services of an alchemist like you are not small. I'm almost sure that you can do more business with them than you do here at the Alchemy Guild." What Minas said was really not a lie. If we consider only the soldiers who are in the corporal hierarchy, each of them receives 400 crystals per month. And with such a salary, if such a soldier saved for about 4 months, he would certainly have enough crystals to buy a grade .1, high grade, pill. Of course, the same would not apply to arrays or spiritual weapons since these two types of items can be considered durable goods, which can be used several times. Therefore, they are naturally more expensive. And for alchemists, most of their business was done from person to person, who usually bought only 1 or 2 pills at a time. Big purchases like the ones that Minas had done were very rare, and it was done only by those great nobles and members of wealthy families. That way, if what Minas said to Davis was true, then it would be very advantageous for this middle-aged man to accept this deal. Davis thought for a while and said, "I can go with you to your dry city. If what you said is indeed true, I will see it with my own eyes. Just like that, I will be able to accept this offer." Minas smiled and said, "Well. So, this works too. If you don't like how things are going in the dry city, then I won't insist on this deal anymore." After that, Minas and his group stayed at the Hotel Olsen in Portland. They had to wait for the ship they had rented to be prepared for the travel. Minas also wanted to see other people with whom he had previously spoken. Perhaps some of them would accept to come with them as well. One day passed quickly, and the group of Minas was already in a big boat, heading towards the continent, towards the maritime city. For this trip, they would need almost 2 days of sailing. As for the people Minas had contacted in Portland, besides Davis, no one else had agreed to come to the Black Plain. Meanwhile, in a city in the border region of the Kingdom of the Waves with the Black Plain, there was a medium-sized mansion in the middle of the city. In that place, a large number of men with grotesque expressions were scattered around that property. This was the former place of the local government of the Yellow City, the only city in that region bordering the Black Plain. About 70,000 inhabitants and the local government were replaced by criminals from that region some time ago. Unlike the Black Plain, this region had sufficient resources for some criminal groups to develop and try to control the surrounding areas. And since no noble families were ruling the Yellow City, then these criminal groups came together and kidnapped the regent who had been sent to that place, taking the local power for themselves. There was a large conference table in the middle of a large room, with several men seated while they were actively talking. At that moment, one of the men said it out loud. "Chief Ghoul, one of the merchants captured by my subordinates, seems to have seen something interesting in our region." At that point, everyone in the room stopped their random conversations and concentrated on listening to what that man had to say. He then laughed out loud and said, We may have a big chance soon. When one of my men was torturing this traitor, he opened his mouth about something he had seen not far from here. According to him, he saw a fox-like spiritual beast. But this beast was very different from normal foxes. It had 5 tails and also seemed to be pregnant. He then drank a large glass of alcohol and said, "I don't know what race this beast is, but her cub can yield hundreds of thousands of low-grade crystals if we sell her in the kingdom's capital." "Oh. Is there such a beast?" asked one of the group's criminals. We just have to look around. Since she was pregnant when that merchant saw her, I'm sure she will be in the same place for at least a few weeks. It must also be weakened. This is our chance. The worst that can happen is that the beast is not as valuable as we think. But I believe that it is worth trying. The man called Chief Ghoul said out loud. He was the leader of this bandit group, already at level 47. As for why someone of that level was living in a place almost as poor as the Black Plain, well, that was because that man is a criminal wanted by one of the great families of the Kingdom of the Waves. And he could not escape to other kingdoms, as these large families had relations throughout the northern region of the central continent. That way, he could only live a relatively safe life in almost abandoned places. And unlike the Black Plain, where the Brown Kingdom still maintained a port city, there was no power belonging to large families of the Kingdom of the Waves in the region of the Yellow City. This is because the Kingdom of the Waves had a large coastal territory and did not need a single point to do business with other regions. Because of this, many years ago, Ghoul had created his group of bandits in this region that is close to the Black Plain. But the Yellow City was not as weak as the Dry City. No, while in the city controlled by Minas, there were no natives above level 39, in the town commanded by Ghoul, it was not uncommon to find people with level 40 in the streets. Well, we are going to send 2 groups to track this fox. When it is found, you definitely cannot attack it. We will leave it up to me and some of the strongest in the group to resolve this. Ghoul said with a strange smile on his face. That's it. Some of the men shouted as they listened to Chief Ghoul's orders. As for the subject of these traitors who came from outside the kingdom, it is better to reduce our actions for the time being. This can attract the attention of some families in the region. Many of them agreed, making gestures with their heads. Chapter 52. Back to the Dry City. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Another 4 days went by, and the group of Minas was already arriving in Dry City. They passed quickly in the maritime city, but since none of them had anything to do there, they continued on their journey without stopping to rest in that city. And Minas, who had stayed longer than usual for him at level 33, finally had a breakthrough 3 days ago. He was now at level 34, which would allow him to finally use the grade .2 sword that he had purchased more than a month ago. Of course, to do that, he would have to use all of his techniques in combination, which required a lot on his part, but it would be worth it. With his current level and this sword, he could even defeat someone at level 42. Incidentally, spiritual weapons were not just instruments used as a support for techniques. No, if it were the case, they would not be so expensive. The weapons could have different effects, but in general, they could increase the strength or spiritual conversion of the technique that the user was using. That is why these weapons were valuable. Otherwise, cultivators could very well use sticks or stones during a fight. This could also be used as a weapon but would have no amplifying effect. Some weapons could also have innate attributes, but this only happened in weapons above grade .3. Anyway, the sword that Minos bought had no attribute, but it could still increase his proficiency in fights. Without it, he could fight at most someone at level 41. The difference could be small, but that's because Minos hasn't even reached level 40, where he could use the sword without limitations. Anyway, during this period when they were on Stone Island, none of Minos' soldiers made any progress. It wasn't easy for someone like them to move as fast as Minos. To get an idea, even talented people, and with many resources, increasing a single level in the spiritual general stage could take 5 months. So, it would not be easy for these soldiers who had only blue talent and did not have large amounts of resources with them. Although they had great salaries in the Black Plain Army, there were not many resources like spiritual pills or arrays in the Dry City. And in the period that they were traveling, with the prices charged on the Stone Island, they could at most buy 3 pills, with all the crystals that each one had. So, until Minos managed to attract several alchemists to the Dry City, who would charge more affordable prices, they could not increase their cultivation speeds much. Hours passed, and the group of carriages quickly approached the Dry City. They were a few dozen kilometers away, but seeing some details from this distance would not be difficult for cultivators like them. Soon, Elin and Edouard, who were in another carriage, spotted a large green patch near the Dry City. There were different types of plants being grown in that place, and not far away, there was a lake almost as big as the city itself, which was not far from there. Wow! This place really grew a lot in just over a year. Edouard said while observing the landscape from a distance. Really? When we came here, he had just started farming on the Black Plain, but now he has reached that point in such a short time. The young Elin said as she analyzed the situation. It did not take long, and the spiritual beasts that carried the carriages traveled the distance left for the group to reach the eastern entrance to the Dry City. This was a place of control created during many of the transformations that the Dry City had undergone. At this point, about 30 soldiers were guarding this entrance to the city, and anyone who had to enter here would have to pass through them. Look, it's the young master's carriage. He's back. One of the soldiers standing by at the checkpoint spoke loudly. It looks like soon the forces of the Black Plain Army will be able to increase. Another soldier, who was at level 39, said anxiously. He was one of several soldiers who had reached the bottleneck in cultivation, with blue talent in level 39. That way, only with outside aid he could continue to grow stronger. Which was exactly what Minos was bringing. Upon entering the city, Elin and Edouard had a big surprise. The Dry City was completely different, almost as if they had entered another city. Now the place didn't look as humble as it used to. Now there were some well-organized avenues to facilitate contact between the various parts of the city and space for the passage of many carriages simultaneously. And although there are none other than those of the Minos group going through it, in the future, there would be. So, building such infrastructure in advance would certainly make the future development of this place much easier. Now, there were also several trees scattered around the city, which gave a much more pleasant feeling when someone looks at this place. Wow! It seems that Mr. Minos actually spared no effort to improve this place. Elin thought to herself as she felt even more secure with her partnership with Minos. With so much determination to improve the Black Plain, Minos would certainly succeed. And with that, Elin would also gain a lot by having such a reliable partnership with him. And although Minos did this to increase the city's attraction and, as a result, increasing his strength, he also wanted to create a pleasant place for him to live. Some rulers may think of just exploring their territory, investing the least in the place, and taking almost all, or even all the resources to themselves. Minos didn't think that way. He didn't want to limit himself to just his mansion. He wanted the whole city to be pleasant to be in. He certainly had goals that would compel him to travel throughout the spiritual world, but in the end, he would still spend most of his life in this city. And when he has accomplished his goals, he would like to not have to travel to other parts of the world to get what he wants. It would be better if he had everything in his territory. That is comfort and quality of life when the quality doesn't change as you leave your mansion and walk through the city. If you can only have comfort in your home, then even if you have millions of crystals, you will still have your life negatively affected by your own corruption. BL.net. The group then arrived at the beautiful mansion redesigned in the meantime that Elin had come here and now. Miss Elin, now that my residence has been expanded, we have some areas for visitors. You don't need to stay in a hotel in the city. You are welcome here. Minas said, with a smile on his face. Not only was he polite to the beautiful Elin, but it was also because there was no hotel chain like the Olsen family in the Dry City. And after the redesign of the city, there was only one hotel left in the entire town. Many of the earlier locations have become residential buildings for residents who lived in other parts of the city, unaffected by the spiritual meeting arrays. As a result, the few hotels in the city have decreased to just one, the Four Seasons Hotel. And because of that, it could be that there were no vacancies available for Elin and her bodyguard. That is why Minas had to make this polite offer. Thanks for that, Elin answered sincerely. After that, the group split up. Elin and Edouard were guided to the area reserved for visitors, while Minas and Ruth proceeded to the administrative part of the building. The soldiers who accompanied Minas on this trip were also released from their services, receiving a few days off. Not long after, Minas spotted Secretary Mia. Mia looked even younger and more beautiful than before. That's because she had reached level 30 in that period that Minas was in Stone Island. In the past year, she had reached level 29, and in that little more than a month that Minas was traveling, she finally managed to break through to the beginning of the spiritual warrior stage. As for why she looked younger, this is because her body had undergone the changes that occurred at each stage of cultivation. With that, her vitality had doubled, resulting in an even younger and more beautiful appearance than before. Then the previous one looked like a young adult woman. Now she looked like a teenager. But this was completely normal. Everyone was going through such changes in this world. Just to give you an idea, the butler Dillion, who looks like a middle-aged man now, if he reaches level 50, his appearance would be considerably rejuvenated. Oh. By changing your appearance, you must have moved on to the next step in cultivation. Congratulations, Mia. Minas said with a smile on his face as he headed towards his office. It is good to see you again, young master. And thanks for that. Mia replied cheerfully. She was pleased. Getting stronger was very good, but the change that someone's body went from one stage to another was delightful. Imagine if you have felt discomfort for years, and suddenly it goes away. This was the feeling of having your cells improved by spiritual energy and the expulsion of toxins. It was as if life became much more comfortable. In addition, there was also a considerable increase in the life expectancy of the cultivator. And that was the main reason for the people who cultivated, after all, who wouldn't want to be able to live longer. Chapter 53. Improvements in the Black Plain Army. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After greeting Secretary Mia, Minas headed for his office, with the young Ruth right behind him. He wanted to see the butler Dillion again and start arguing about distributing the items he had purchased on Stone Island. Minas entered his office not long afterward and found a middle-aged man drinking spiritual tea. He was comfortably seated with his legs crossed on one of the sofas in this room while he had a cup in one hand and some papers in the other. At that moment, the butler Dillion noticed that someone had entered the room, and he slowly turned to see who it was. Oh. Young master, you are already back. Hee, it looks like things went well on your trip. He also noticed a young woman with long black hair behind Minas. Ah. Miss Ruth is also here. I hope you didn't take long to meet. We met shortly after I arrived in the capital of Stone Island, the old stone city, Ruth confirmed it, looking at Dillion. She had been here for over a month, so the butler was curious to see if everything had worked out. The butler then smiled for a moment and asked Minos with a severe look on his face. And then? How were things on Stone Island? Did the young master have any setbacks? I had some problems along the way. Minos then started to report all the events that had happened since he and his group had left the dry city. He hid almost nothing and talked about everything, from the coyote attack on his way to Maritime City, the auction, the ambush he had set up against the young Daryl's group, and his problems faced with the Nash family. He just didn't talk about his fun with the beautiful Elena since it wasn't crucial for Dillion to know that. While listening to this, Dillion had a complicated expression on his face. He had finally found out who was behind the death of his master and friend, Albert Stewart. So, it really was those miserable ones from the Silva family. Dillion sighed, understanding the situation. At the same time, Ruth was impressed with how many problems were around this young man with whom she was traveling. He actually dares to kill people from such important families in this place. Minos and Dillion didn't care about Ruth's presence in the room since she was neither of power in the region nor an enemy but a disciple of Minos' mother. So, even if Mrs. Maisie were absent, she wouldn't try to harm her son on purpose, and Minos and Dillion knew it. That way, they had no reason for them not to speak openly in front of the beautiful Ruth. But that is not all bad. Now we at least know who our enemy is. And the young master shouldn't be bothered by the Silva family by tracking you down in the short term. This should take a long time before they find the young master's exact identity. Butler Dillion changed the subject and said with a smile on his face. But this problem with young Master Luke truly benefited us. Who knew the Nash family would be so generous to us? Minos nodded and said. Because of that, I came back with even more medium-grade crystals than when I left to go to the Stone Island. Anyway, how are the forces of the Black Plain Army? How many of them have already reached the level 39 bottleneck? Well, not many. At the moment, we only have 15 more soldiers who can step up to level 40 after absorbing the power of the pills that the young master bought. But as for those at level 29, we have many. About 60 soldiers are at this level. If we can help them level up with spiritual pills, they will be able to level up a few months in advance. Dillion said. Well, it's not that bad since most of our soldiers are in the middle of their respective stages. It also gives us time to acquire more resources. If they were all ready to receive these pills, we would not be able to deliver such demand. Minos spoke while handing a spatial ring to the butler Dillion. Here, Grandpa Dillion, you can distribute these pills and spiritual weapons to the highest-ranking soldiers, who have met the requirements for this. Okay, I'm going to do this as soon as possible. Okay, in that period that the young master was on Stone Island, our city's population continued to grow, and we now have 47,583 inhabitants in the city. However, all of these people came from the vicinity of the dry city. Dillion said, remembering this important fact. Oh. This is good. Almost the entire population of the Black Plain has already migrated to our city. Except for the Maritime City, which cannot be considered as part of our sovereignty area, in a short time, there will be no more people living outside the dry city in our region. Minos said without many expressions. With that, they could continue to increase the plantation area under the control of Minos. Even if it was a slight population increase, it was still enough for the next 6 months. But after that, if Minos wanted to expand, he would have to attract people elsewhere. But don't worry about it now, Grandpa Dillion. We have already found a place where we can attract more labor to the dry city. Oh. And how are we going to do that? Dillion asked curiously. Well, we're going to do it like this. Minos started to tell the information he had obtained from Elena and Elin. This was something that Dillion did not know either, since until recently, he was just someone who took care of the affairs of the late General Albert. So, he didn't have as much information about what was going on outside the Brown Kingdom. All he knew was basic knowledge of these territories, as anyone at his age would know. But he did not know the details of what was happening in such an unimportant region, such as the border between the Kingdom of the Waves and the Black Plain. TSK, this indeed seems to be the best alternative for the young master. With that, at least we are not going to draw the attention of the great powers of the region. Dillion agreed with what he had heard from Minos. Minos then sighed and said. Anyway, changing the subject, how is the progress of those two youths? Very good. Allison reached level 22 while the young master was away. As for the boy, Lee, he reached level 23. Dillion replied with a smile on his face. Although these two were not as quick as Minos, they were being nurtured as the priorities of the Dry City forces. For this reason, their cultivation speeds could be considered very good. This is good. Then bring them back. I will send them to their special training soon. They've had more than a month to stay with their families. Now it's time for them to train even more. Minos finished. After that, each of the three people went their own way. Dillion went to resolve matters concerning the distribution of the resources he had received from Minos. Minos went to his residence, and Ruth found a place to rest. Not long afterward, Minos entered his spatial kingdom, which he could not do as much while traveling to Stone Island. After all, besides Dillion and the two youths, no one else knew about it, so he couldn't just disappear from nowhere and come back. This would create suspicion for those around him. A month quickly passed. At that time, Minos had given orders for preparations for an attack mission to the border region of the Black Plain with the Kingdom of the Waves to be made. He also wanted to spend that time cultivating so that his risks would be lessened on this expedition. Despite hearing from Elend that the strength of that place was only slightly higher than that of the Black Plain, they had better beware. And in the meantime, Minos has reached level 35. He had spent most of his time within the spatial kingdom, and such an improvement was already expected. In addition, during that time, all soldiers who had reached bottlenecks in cultivation had already made their advances and learned their new battle techniques. Some of them had also received new spiritual weapons and were already getting used to them. Some changes have also occurred for ordinary people in the Dry City. Now there was another spiritual meeting array in operation in the city, which was even better than the other four that had been here for over a year. As a result, the area covered by the arrays increased considerably, increasing the city's territory. But not only that, with the arrival of the alchemist Davis, the ordinary population of the city was now completely excited about the possibility of increasing their cultivation speeds with the help of the spiritual pills sold by this specialist. Chapter 54. Davy's Decision. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 54. Davy's Decision. A month earlier. The alchemist Davis, who had come from Stone Island with the group of Minos, was getting to know the Dry City. After the group arrived at the mansion in the central part of the city, Davis was accommodated in the local government officials' visiting area. After resting from the trip for a while, Davis finally decided to see the city. He had previously seen the landscape around the town and some fields of culture not far from here while traveling with the group of Minos. The city itself did not attract Davis's attention. After all, he did not know the Dry City before that. So, he didn't know if this place was more or less good than it had been before Minos arrived. All he knew was that it was not possible to grow any kind of plant on the Black Plain. So, he was really impressed with that. Even though Minos said that this problem had already been solved, it was not easy to believe. There are certain things that a person could only believe seeing. He had also noticed that the spiritual concentration in the Dry City was actually much less than in the city of Portland. He realized this after he started cultivating in the town since he was only at level 38, and he did not have the ability to feel the free energy in heaven and on earth without him starting to cultivate. Let me see what life is like in this place. Davis started walking the city streets, watching all the details carefully. He saw that the city's infrastructure was very well prepared, with the capacity to receive several dozen carriages simultaneously, but he had seen none after he left Minas Mansion. There aren't many spiritual beasts either, and the few that I saw were all low level. He thought to himself as he watched the movement of the street that he was on. Shortly thereafter, Davis arrived at a very busy place. In that place, there was a plaque with the name Central Market. This was a huge building, with 3 floors and a large entrance. Due to the great movement, Davis decided to enter to see the place. However, as soon as he got inside the building, Davis frowned and muttered to himself. So much movement just to buy apples. In one of the many stalls on the first floor of the Central Market building, the one with the most movement, there was a large pile of apples and a plaque with the price tag. 20 crystals per kilo. In this tent, several people were huddled together, shouting as much as they wanted to the 3 attendants. I want 2 kilos. And I, half a kilo. While watching this, Davis was perplexed. He has never seen people buying fruit in such a lively way. I don't understand, they act as if they are competing for a product on sale, but the price is just a little cheaper than in Portland. He then approached a woman who was waiting in line and asked. Madam, I'm sorry to bother you, but can you tell me why people are so excited to buy these apples? The woman then looked at Davis with a strange look and said. You do not know. This must be your first time here. I don't blame you. This is the last batch of apples planted in the Black Plain. The next will only come in 3 months. So, everyone is excited to be able to buy some. If I were you, I wouldn't miss this opportunity. It won't be long until it's over. The woman said before placing her order with one of the attendants. After hearing this, Davis was very curious and decided to get in line. He was here to get to know the city, so understanding why the inhabitants of this place valued the region's products so much could help him a lot at this time. Is this a way for them to value their own region? It can't be. This is very exaggerated. Davis thought to himself as he waited for his turn. After a few minutes, he finally got what he wanted. He bought 2 large apples that cost him 10 low-grade crystals. He then used some of his spiritual energy to clean the apple and then tasted it. Ugh! When he felt the amount of spiritual energy that the apple was providing him, after just 1 bite, he immediately jumped in surprise. How can this be? This is clearly a fruit with a high spiritual concentration. Something like that would have cost about 60 low-grade crystals on the Stone Island. He murmured, taking another bite of the apple in his hand. Ah! So, that's why those people were in such a hurry to buy these apples. Davis thought, as he realized how important it was for those people. This is because foods with high spirituality could be as good as cultivating low-grade spiritual crystals. This might not be a big deal for cultivators over level 50, but it was incredible for the people of the Black Plain. Davis did not have much information about this place, but he knew that the inhabitants of the Dry City, a place with low spiritual density, must have talents of, at most, blue-grade. With rarely someone more talented showing up. As a result, for those normally trapped below level 40, the spiritual energy contained in food was very important. But not only that, even people with golden talent, in the early stages of cultivation, greatly valued the spiritual richness of their meals since no one could use spiritual crystals before level 20. Now I understand. Davis said in a low voice. But how did they do that? As far as I know, cultures with a high spiritual concentration only grow in regions with a high spiritual density. Davis continued to walk through the Dry City as he knew the place little by little. He did this for 4 days until finally, he had made his decision. After noting that plants of high spiritual concentration could grow in this region and conversations with different residents of this place, he discovered all the changes that this city had undergone after Minas' arrival. He was stunned when he found that this place had been almost completely remodeled in just over a year. Not only that, he learned that the city's spiritual energy was even lower earlier. When he heard about it, he even tried to cultivate another part of the city, a place where it was unaffected by the spiritual meeting arrays, to know the difference. When he did that, he found that this place was even poorer in spiritual energy than he thought. The city was only slightly better due to the various arrays that were burning low-grade crystals constantly. After all that, Davis finally came to the conclusion that Minas could put an end to the offer that he had previously made. With that, this place could certainly be a great opportunity for an alchemist without the support of large families like Davis. Anyway, shortly after deciding, Davis met with Minas and worked out the last details, including the location of the alchemy store that Davis would run. As for the resources that he would need to produce the spiritual pills, this would be provided by the young Elon, at least until some of these medicines began to be planted here in the Black Plain. There were several spiritual medicines, but those from the spatial kingdom could not be used by someone as low-level as Davis. So, Davis could only start working only importing these resources from other kingdoms. After that, a few days passed, and Davis finally opened his alchemy store. Because of the agreement he had made with Minas, he could charge prices far below the market for pills sold to the people of the Dry City. To give you an idea of this, grade 0.1, low-grade, medium-grade, and high-grade, pills generally had priced in the range of 100, 500, and 1000 low-grade crystals, respectively. However, Minas made a deal in which he and Davis would charge only 30, 150 and 300, low-grade crystals for each pill he sold from those ratings. This was an effort to increase the strength of the population of the Dry City and the soldiers of the Black Plain Army. This action could also attract less talented people to migrate to this region. This was necessary since, for the labor for the fields of cultures, people with low talent were the most suitable for this type of service. After all, it would be a waste to put someone with high talent to grow grains. Minas also did not intend to do this for a long time. He planned to give subsidies to some alchemists for 20 years. After that time, prices would increase and be closer to the values charged in other regions. However, when that happened, the Dry City would already have other factors that could attract and keep cultivators. It didn't take long, and soon the population of the Dry City was very excited about the news that an alchemist was opening a store in the city. The rumor also said that the prices charged would be so low that even farmers could afford to buy spiritual pills. Chapter 55. Chance of a Lifetime. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. In a very popular restaurant among farmers in the city, there was a group of 4 men actively talking about their daily activities in the plantations of the Black Plain while having lunch. These were ordinary inhabitants in the Dry City, people who had white talent. One of the men, who had long gray hair, changed the subject and said, "Old Roy, you've reached level 29 a long time ago, right?" The man named Roy, who appeared to be the oldest in the group, looked at his friend and replied, "Yes, I reached this level 39 years ago. What's the point of talking about it now, Errol? You must have heard the rumor that an alchemist opened a store here, in the Dry City." At first, I still doubted it, but this morning I saw a huge queue coming out of a store, not far from Mr. Minas' mansion. After I saw this, I waited for a while and asked one of the people who had left the store why those people were in that queue. Old Errol said, looking at the other 3 men who were eating. He then continued. "I found out from that person that I asked that an alchemist is taking orders for grade 0.1 spiritual pills." "Oh. So, it's really true." "As expected, Mr. Minas is extraordinarily efficient," said one of the other 2 men, who were with the group. "What about the prices? I heard it was a lot cheaper than normal, is that right?" the other old man asked. Errol then replied with a smile on his face. "Yes, it is a lot cheaper. A grade 0.1, medium-grade, pill, which can help someone break from level 29 to 30, costs 150 low-grade crystals." Old Roy, who was drinking from a large mug of beer, almost spit out a full mouth after hearing this. He then got up from his chair and asked with a serious face. "What? Are you sure about this?" Errol smiled and said. I wouldn't lie to you." Upon hearing this answer, Roy burst out laughing and then said it aloud before leaving the restaurant. "Ha ha ha, well, you can wait for me in the field. I'm going to visit this store." After that, Roy quickly left the restaurant and headed for the central part of the city. He was very excited by the idea that he could buy a grade .1, medium level, spiritual pill that would be able to help him break through his bottleneck. And although that pill still cost a good deal of his economies, it was still worth a lot. He had collected about 300 crystals during the past year while working as a farmer for the local government. And by raising his strength, he could do more at work and even earn a salary increase. Of course, that still wasn't the best part. As someone with white talent, Roy was limited by level 29, and without outside help, he would not be able to advance any further, and he was almost 200 years old at this point. At such an age, he could live at most another 50 years. However, with a 4th stage breakthrough spiritual pill, he could increase his life expectancy to 450 years. And that was why he was in such a hurry. Like an old man at the end of his life, any chance of salvation would be pursued with all the will of his being. As Roy headed for Davis's alchemical store, many other people received the same news as Roy and Errol's group. This was a chance of a lifetime for hundreds of residents of the Dry City, who had already reached their bottlenecks and were continuing to get old. It didn't take long, and orders for grade .1, medium level, spiritual pills, specialized in advancing from the 3rd to the 4th stage, surpassed the thousands mark. As expected, with such a low price, even people who have not yet reached their bottleneck would buy these pills to use them at the right time. Davis thought to himself as he saw the number of orders that the secretary he had hired passed on to him. With such demand, even if I have all the resources, it will still take me about 4 months just to produce these pills. Davis sighed internally. He was happy that his business finally took off, but there was a lot of work ahead. At that time, Minos had just left his training within the Spatial Kingdom, where he had broken through to level 35. He did not want to remain focused on just cultivating at that time. According to his count, the spiritual tournament was less than 5 months away, and he still had to solve the problem on the north side of the border. For this reason, he had decided to settle some more pending matters on the Black Plain before finally leaving to confront these groups of criminals on the border. To begin with, he had held a meeting in the presence of the soldiers who had already attained the rank of sergeant, with Butler Dillion and some influential members of the Dry City administration. At this meeting, it was decided that the Dry City would establish a port base on the maritime coast of the Black Plain. This base would be controlled initially by the Black Plain Army until a city in that place was constructed. For the time being, they had no interest in establishing this city, but this could have negative implications for the Black Plain as a whole. For example, the first problem was that they did not have enough population even for the affairs of the Dry City, let alone a port city. They also did not want to risk attracting the attention of the maritime city by building a city that could compete with its. Thus, for now, this place would be just a branch base of the Black Plain Army, which would have the purpose of receiving and sending products to the merchant Elon Nash from Stone Island. It was decided that this place would be built in the remaining 2 months until the beginning of the next harvest. And at that time, the site would be guarded by a group of 3 sergeants, 10 corporals, and 20 soldiers, who would revert their positions from time to time. They also decided to increase the cultivated area for the next harvest. At the moment, the unemployed population of the Dry City could supply a workforce that could add another 100 hectares, resulting in a total of 200. As for if they wanted to increase that area, they would have to attract the border populations of the Black Plain first. This is because there would be no more workforce available after that period. After the meeting ended, Ruth watched everything curiously, got up from her chair, and asked Minos with a curious face. "And then? Shall we leave for the Kingdom of the Waves? I'm curious to see you in action." Ruth wanted to find out what Minas' real strength was. That's because she had never seen him fight. When they were on Stone Island, she was separated from him in the only fight he had after they had both met. But she didn't know if Minas had beaten Luke because he had some powerful external means or if it was actually his own power. And seeing Minas moving faster and faster only made Ruth's curiosity grow even more. So, it was a golden chance for her since they could face many criminals during this mission. I will not leave you in that place. I want to see if you can keep hiding from me. Ruth thought as she looked away from Minas, with the corners of her mouth slightly up. She also wanted to know what the degree of Minas' techniques was. That's because his cultivation speed was very abnormal. As far as she knew, even someone with a golden talent could not cultivate so fast without a high-level technique. So, if Minas had only one black talent, where had he found his cultivation technique? It certainly couldn't come from Albert. As for Minas' mother, Ruth knew that in the Grey Cloud sect, there was a single golden grade technique, but it was not a cultivation technique. So, Minas' mother couldn't have helped him with that either. Ruth asked all these questions to herself almost every time she saw Minas increase in strength. So, she was getting more and more interested in him. After that, Minas left to meet the beautiful Elin. She had been staying at the mansion this entire time and had decided to wait for Minas to make this trip to the Kingdom of the Waves. Despite having her own affairs, she would prefer to wait a little longer and then spend more time with this miraculous ally that she had made. And it wouldn't be a bad thing to have more people helping with this task. Even if her bodyguard was already at level 48, it didn't hurt to be careful. At that moment, Minas entered through the apartment door where Elin was staying. He then greeted the man in silver armor and went towards the blonde woman, who enjoyed the view of the dry city through a large glass window. It is time for us to leave. My group will be ready in 2 days. Minas said seriously. Chapter 56. Traveling to the Yellow City. You are listening at novelfull.audio. This is good. We will prepare to leave in 2 days then, Elin said with a smile on her face. She was already looking forward to resolving this issue and returning to Stone Island. She liked to see the improvements made in the Dry City, but this place still lacked many things in relation to the old Stone City. So, she didn't want to stay here for long. In fact, I have a suggestion for you, she said, looking into Minas's eyes. Oh. Tell me, have you heard of the spiritual tournament? This is a good event for you to meet the future governors of this region of the central continent. Minas then shook his head and said. I've heard of this competition. In fact, after we get back from the Kingdom of the Waves, I will be training for a few weeks, and then I will go to the Cromwell Kingdom to participate in this tournament. As expected. He must have heard that from that woman who is always with him. I heard that she has a very abnormal strength. Elin thought to herself, hearing Minas's response. She had heard from one of her servants that Ruth had beaten 3 guards escorting the young Master Luke. Because of her, Minas had been able to escape the clutches of that arrogant young blonde. She also started to think about the implications this woman could bring to her business with Minas. Is she someone from an empire? Elin thought. This made sense to her. After all, in addition to Ruth's unbelievable strength, Minas was a big unknown in her eyes. Maybe an empire is helping him out of the shadows. Minas then continued after noticing Elin's thoughtful expression. But don't worry about it. I have no interest in going to the Flaming Empire. I will participate in the spiritual tournament to do what you suggested. Meet these future sovereigns of the northern region of the central continent. Elin relaxed a little and blew out a silent breath upon hearing this. She then said. I understand. Well, since we have solved everything, I am going to go out and make some preparations. See you in 2 days. Minas said before saying goodbye to Elin and her bodyguard, Edward. After a while, Minas was in his office, along with Butler Dillion, Sergeant Pike, and Secretary Mia. Pike then said. Young master, we are preparing the 24 soldiers, who have already reached level 40, to accompany you on this trip. There will also be another 30 men, who are between levels 35 and 39. Of the 25 soldiers who had reached the 5th stage, only Sergeant Pike would not go on this mission to the Kingdom of the Waves. Minos had decided that this time, Pike would stay in the Dry City to run this place during his absence. Grandpa Dillion, on this trip, I want you to accompany me. We may need your medical techniques since we do not know exactly the enemy force. Minos said with a serious look on his face. Butler Dillion, after all, was not a warrior but someone who focused his techniques on one area, which was medicine. Like him, doctors were much different from alchemists, blacksmiths, and array masters. This is because they did not produce any type of external item. What a doctor offered in this world was nothing more than healing techniques. They could also be classified as support professionals, which could be very useful in battles. After all, people were always injured in these types of events, but spiritual healing pills could not be used all the time since it was very expensive. For this reason, doctors were very useful in missions, such as the one that the Minos group was preparing to go to. Dillion then said with a smile on his face. Hee, it's okay. It was time for this old man to see some action. As for Secretary Mia, at this time, I want you to help Sergeant Pike manage the city. I know he has to take care of the Black Plain Army, so he will not always be able to solve all the administrative problems here. Minos said, looking at Mia. She then responded resolutely. You can leave it, young master. I will not disappoint you. After that, the group split up, leaving only Minos in the office. He then returned to the Spatial Kingdom to observe the two youths who were training there at this time. Allison and Lee had already returned to the Spatial Kingdom since Minos had asked Dillion to bring them back. Minos intended to leave them there until he went to the Cromwell Kingdom, which was supposed to happen within the next 3 months. Minos then observed the two training their fighting techniques while eating a spiritual apple next to the large house that was near the lake. The two youths then noticed his presence and soon came running towards him. Master, can you give us some tips? Lee asked in his childish voice. What do you want to know? After that, Minos began to advise the two youths while making some gestures to demonstrate to the two how they should act to increase their proficiency in fighting. After a while, Lee and Allison continued their fighting training while Minos watched them closely. Time passed, and all preparations for the mission to the Kingdom of the Waves were ready. All 54 soldiers, who were going on this trip, were already in their respective carriages while escorted Minos, Ruth, Dillion, Elin, and Edouard. They traveled to the Yellow City, which was about 1,500 kilometers from the Dry City, heading north. According to the information that the group of Minos had obtained with Elin, this city had no noble family and was governed by a regent. And just like the Black Plain, hardly any noble family passed through the place or cared about the security in order there. As for the royal family, they were even less interested in that place, which the Brown family was to the region under the command of Minos. At least it was like that until a few months ago. However, Elin also had no further information about the city since some of the Nash family delivery men, who traveled through this place, did not send any more news from that region and were reported as missing. As far as Elin knew, before that time, the Yellow City had many groups of bandits, but they had not yet shown any interest in publicly taking over the government of that region. At least, for those who received news of what was happening in that place, the actions of these groups were moderate. And as long as the merchants paid some fees, they could pass through the region smoothly. Miss Elin, do you have information about the leader of these bandits? Dillion asked calmly. Elin shook her head, denying that. I do not know. But he is not yet a spiritual king. I am sure of that. From our information, some of these bandits must be famous fugitives from different parts of the central continent. But if any of them had already reached the spiritual king stage, they certainly wouldn't be here. I don't know if you know, but there is a large organization of assassins in the north of the central continent. It is called, Scourges of the Devil, and only accepts renowned criminals who have already reached level 50. Because of that, if any of them had reached that level, he would certainly leave this region to join the forces of the Scourges of the Devil. And even if the Yellow City is a little stronger than the Dry City, no spiritual king would live in a place like this. Elend said with a severe expression. Scourges of the Devil, huh? Dillion thought to himself. This was the organization's name that had dispatched 2 assassins to help the Silva family kill the former General Albert. The Scourges of the Devil, despite being a criminal organization focused on assassinations, they were almost as strong as some of the weakest kingdoms in the region. And that was why any large families did not pursue them in this part of the central continent. Unless there were a big grudge, no one would want to mess with that organization. After all, although they are not that numerous, all the members were spiritual kings. And to make matters worse, no one knew where the headquarters of this group was. So, it was complicated for anyone to act openly against the Scourges of the Devil, making this organization a dream for many of the criminals in that region of the continent. This was the reason that made Elend so sure that there were no spiritual kings in the Yellow City. I understand, Minas said while having a thoughtful look on his face. This was an organization on his list of vengeance in the future. Butler Dillion had already told Minas about this group and their involvement in the attack that Albert had suffered. After that, 2 days passed quickly, and the group of Minas had already covered most of the distance to the Yellow City. They could reach their destination within the next few hours, and it was already beginning to prepare to set up camp near the city. In a particular mansion in the Yellow City, a man came running to the office where the bandits' leader was. Chief Ghoul, we found that fox and her cub. Chapter 57. The beginning of the mission. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At that time, the leader of the bandits of the Yellow City was in his office accompanied by 3 other men when the door opened, and a subordinate reported that they had found the whereabouts of the strange fox and its cub. So, where is she? One of the men in the room asked anxiously. The other 2 men also showed a lot of interest and began to pay attention to the person who had reported this news. She is in a cave about 500 kilometers from here in the Yellow City. The bosses need not worry. She is very weak and should not be leaving that place anytime soon. The subordinate, who had reported the news, said with a smile on his face. Ha ha ha, good. We are going to prepare an expedition to capture both the mother and the cub. Chief Ghoul said with a smile that went from ear to ear. By the way, what is the stage of cultivation of this beast? One of the 3 men asked curiously. The leader of the hunt group said that she should be in the 5th stage of cultivation. The subordinate responded promptly. If it were in normal situations, it would be impossible for us to capture such a beast without fighting with the intention of killing. But since she just gave birth to her cub, it won't be that difficult. Ghoul said out loud. Ghoul then turned to one of the 3 men and said. Lido, go and make the preparations for our hunt. I believe that 10 people above level 44 will be enough. Call all of our commanders. One of the 3 men, who was named Lido and was at level 45, nodded and left the office quickly to resolve this matter. Of the other 2 in the room, they were also on the same level as Lido and were just below Ghoul in the hierarchy within the Yellow City bandit group. Not only that, each of these 3 had 2 commanders at level 44 as their subordinates, who, in turn, controlled the rest of the group. This was the power structure that Ghoul had put in place to control this city. Chief Ghoul then looked at the other 2, who were still in the room, and said. Make the other preparations. When we leave the strongest in the city, it will only be at level 43. Okay, boss, let's get everything ready as soon as possible. The 2 responded and then left the room. He, it looks like I'm finally going to have a great opportunity. It won't be long, and those who chased me before will all be killed. Ha ha ha. Ghoul spoke aloud while laughing maniacally. A few hours later, the Minas group established a temporary camp, 30 kilometers from the Yellow City, where their group would wait to act. They had chosen to stop at that point because here it was not so far from the city, as it also had some plants and rock formations that could hide the group of undesirable eyes. Sergeant Humbert, make a group of 10 corporals and visit Yellow City to collect information about these criminal groups active in this region, Minas said while looking in the direction of one of the soldiers. But wear clothes that are common and different from each other. You should also divide this team into 5 smaller groups, which do not attract unwanted attention within the city. Do this data collection and return as soon as possible. You will be leading this task. Okay, young master, I will do this as soon as possible. Sergeant Humbert responded promptly. Then he quickly gathered the 10 men and headed for the Yellow City. At that moment, the young Elin approached where Minas was and said with a smile on her face. You are very careful, and you seem to have a lot of experience in this. Have you done this kind of thing before? Upon hearing this question, Ruth, who was sitting in a chair that the soldiers had set up, looked at Minas, expecting to know the same. Upon hearing and seeing Elin and Ruth's reactions, Minas laughed gently and said, more or less that. A few minutes passed, and the group formed by Sergeant Humbert arrived in Yellow City. As soon as they arrived, 3 carriages with about 10 men left that city, heading towards the east. Seeing this, Humbert, who was the only spiritual general in the group, frowned and thought to himself, 10 people, and they're all at least level 44. The strongest is at level 47, could it be that some great merchant is passing through here? Never mind, let's get to know this place soon. After that, he stopped paying attention to the group and entered the city. Meanwhile, in one of the carriages, Ghoul smiled and thought. It is just a group of spiritual warriors and a person at level 40. They cannot do anything in the Yellow City. There must be another group of traders who don't know what's going on here. According to different directions upon entering the city, Humbert's group soon separated. Despite being a much bigger city than the Dry City, they could see that this place was much more disorganized and impoverished. Of course, that was only because of what Minas had done during those months when he was running the Dry City. Before this period, the Yellow City would certainly win in all aspects in relation to the old city of these soldiers. Humbert also noticed that the spiritual energy of this place was slightly better than that of the Dry City before the spiritual arrays. In fact, even in the current spiritual concentration of his city, it was barely able to beat Yellow City. As the group spread out, Humbert was walking around the city calmly, as if he were an ordinary passerby from this place. He was constantly watching people and places, probing whenever he saw something that caught his attention. Interestingly, this place has at least 80 cultivators who have already reached level 40. He murmured to himself. And indeed, the Yellow City was much better than the Dry City before the changes made by Minas. They could even afford to buy some grade 1, high grade, spiritual pills for people with blue talent to pass their bottleneck. Anyway, when stopping in a large square in the central part of the city, Humbert stopped at a counter that had several fruits and told the merchant that was there. Buddy, take 2 apples for me. Here it is 20 low-grade crystals. The merchant said while he had the 2 apples in a paper bag. After that, Humbert talked to the merchant for a while and then went on his way through the city. He wanted to recognize the terrain and the forces of the bandits, but the information-gathering service would be a priority for the other men. He then cleaned one of the apples and took a big bite out of it. Low spiritual concentration. As poor in spiritual energy as were the fruits sold in the Dry City previously. At the same time, in different parts of Yellow City, the 5 groups, divided with 2 soldiers in each of them, were quickly infiltrating the conversation and discussions that took place anywhere. All of them had received a good amount of low-level spiritual crystals from Minas to bribe people who indicated any willingness to talk about what was going on in this place. Friend, did I hear that your son is sick and you are doing extra services? Asked one of Minas' soldiers, disguised in a certain restaurant in one of the city's poorest regions. The man he had spoken to turned and answered. That's right, do you have any services for me? This man was very anxious when he heard that. In the Yellow City, life was very difficult for people with low talent. This, of course, was related to the high criminal activity that had been happening recently. That way, many like this man had to work hard to survive in this place. The soldier smiled and said, as he indicated a more isolated place in the restaurant. "Come with me to a place where we can have some privacy." After they sat down, the soldier then said, "Well, here's the thing." Meanwhile, several other soldiers were doing the same in different parts of Yellow City. It was not difficult to find someone complaining about how bad things were recently or to find individuals with family problems who forced them to accept almost any kind of service that could yield them some spiritual crystals. Because of this, the group was quick to understand the events in the previous months, learning a little about the group in power in this city. A day quickly passed when the group of 11 soldiers finally returned from their intelligence gathering. They had not encountered any problems within the Yellow City, as they were disguised as ordinary people. Not only that, but they had no product with them, so the bandit groups in that place showed no interest in them. It didn't take long, and all the people present at Minas camp gathered to discuss the information that Humbert's group had collected. Minas then took the initiative and asked calmly, "And then? What did the group of you manage to discover?" Chapter 58. Planning the attack. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After hearing Minas' question, Humbert sighed and reported his group's findings. "Well, from what we've found, Yellow City is being controlled by a group of criminals led by someone who calls himself Ghoul. He also seems to be the strongest person in the city, but ordinary citizens don't know what level he is at. Almost all the soldiers in our group ended up hearing the same thing about what happened to the city. According to the people we spoke to, about 3 months ago, the group led by Ghoul kidnapped and killed the former conductor of this region. After that, he and his group took control of the local government mansion by arresting all the guards who were under the command of that regent. And from what we heard, this must be something around 50 guards, most of whom are in the 4th stage of cultivation. Not long after they took over the city, they kidnapped and robbed almost all the merchants who passed through the Yellow City. As a result, many of the bandits were able to obtain resources to increase their forces for the 5th stage of cultivation, which further increased the pressure of these criminals on the common population of these areas." Humbert said without hiding anything. The butler Dillion, who was standing next to Minas, suddenly asked, "And how many criminals are in this group led by this Ghoul?" Humbert then responded with a tone of uncertainty. "We do not have the exact number since it is not possible to know how much these criminals hide from the population. But while I was probing the city, I was able to feel at least 80 cultivators of the 5th stage, the strongest of which was at level 43. As for what we found out with the population, these groups of criminals are expected to have around 200 to 300 members in total." At that moment, Elin, who was listening to the report in the corner of the camp, said in disagreement, "There must be something wrong with this research. In my opinion, to cause as many problems as they have caused, this Ghoul should be a level 45 cultivator, at least." Minas nodded and said, It's true. Didn't you feel anyone stronger than that in the city?" Humbert thought about it and suddenly remembered something. He then said, "Ah. Yes, I felt some people like that, but they were leaving the city. In fact, just as we were entering Yellow City, a group of 10 cultivators passed us, heading east. From that group, I could feel that there were 6 cultivators at level 44, 3 at level 45, and 1 that was at level 47. But as they were leaving the city at that time, I thought they were just merchants who were passing through." Humbert said as he remembered what had happened. "Well, these people are probably the leaders of that city. And that person at level 47 must be this Ghoul," Elin said with a serious expression on her face. "But why would the strongest people in this city all go out together?" Butler Dillion asked aloud. Humbert then replied with an uncertain expression. "The townspeople didn't say anything about this group, so we're not sure about that. No matter what the reason, it will be better for us. We will destroy the group that remained in the Yellow City, and then we will find out through one of these bandits. Minos said with a smile on his face. He was happy to have arrived at this place just when the strongest people had left. With that, the fight would be much less difficult, which would greatly increase the chances of winning the future battle. It is true, with that our work will be immensely facilitated, Edward said while agreeing with Minos' words. Minos then asked. What about the places where these criminals are concentrated? Humbert responded shortly after that. They are usually located in 4 places in the city. The first and busiest is the mansion in the center of the city. The second is a nightclub on the south side of the city. And the third and fourth are the west and east entrances to the city, respectively. Well. Okay, so let's do this. We will divide it into 4 groups. Due to the nature of these bandits, they shouldn't be too concerned with the entrance to the city, so the strongest ones certainly don't do this kind of work. In this way, the first and second groups will simultaneously attack the west and east entrances to the Yellow City. Each of these groups will consist of 10 soldiers, with 4 sergeants and 6 corporals in each of its. The third group will be formed by 8 sergeants and 10 corporals. You will have the mission to attack those bandits in this nightclub on the south side of the city. I am sending a larger group because there may be some strong cultivators in this location, as this is probably the place where these outlaws are entertained. As for the fourth group, this will be formed by the rest of us. We are going to take the local government's mansion. In this place, there are probably the strongest cultivators that were left in the city, and they are also more numerous, so we need more strength to attack this place. And during fights, support your teammates as much as possible. Some of your enemies may have higher levels than you, but they certainly don't have techniques as good as yours. So, fight as a team whenever you can. Minos advised everyone. Minos then finalized his orders when he said it out loud. Did you understand? Yes, sir. The soldiers responded in a single tone. After giving these orders, it didn't take long, and the 4 teams left separately for the Yellow City. And for the sake of prevention, they also decided to start the attacks at the same time, when the sun completely disappeared on the horizon. Meanwhile, the group of 10 men heading east from Yellow City had already traveled more than half the way to the cavern where the 9-tailed fox was seen. At that moment, they had stopped to spend the night in that place, where they had chosen to camp. You all, pay attention. Tomorrow when we surround that spiritual beast, the 2 of you will not fight directly with her. Your goal will be to capture her cub, and with that, we will dominate the mother. Chief Ghoul said while he looked at 2 of his commanders at level 44. Okay, Chief Ghoul. The 2 responded quickly. Why do you want to do it this way? One of the 3 men who were at level 45 asked curiously. Benov Calm Ghoul smiled and said. Because it is better to have 2 beasts than just one. Think carefully. Even if she is weakened, she will still be a lot of work for us if she gets desperate. But if we have her cub, she will be more lenient. And after giving a good beating, so that she doesn't cause any more problems, we can sell 2 spiritual beasts, instead of just 1. Of course, the cub will be worth more in the market since it is more difficult to control a grown beast. But some people like that kind of beast too. Ghoul said calmly. And it was actually easier to sell spiritual beasts that are still young, as they don't have well-developed intelligence. That is why the children of any spiritual beast would naturally be more valued in any part of the central continent. As for adult spiritual beasts, such as the mother fox, they had greater intelligence, making them more challenging to tame. However, there was a problem with Ghoul's plan, which was how intelligent a 5th stage beast could be. This is because not everyone in the north of the central continent knew that a spiritual beast would be as intelligent as an adult human when they reached the 5th stage, even speaking the human language. And a beast with such intelligence was impossible to be tamed. As for why not all people knew about this information, well, that was simply because there were not so many spiritual beasts of that level in the north of the central continent. And the few that existed were almost all belonging to high-level families. And even if these families knew about it, it did not mean that they would disclose that information publicly. That's because, if ordinary people knew about it, they could decide to create these better-ranked beasts instead of selling them. With that, these beasts would feel like part of their families, and even after reaching the 5th stage, they would still be very loyal to their human relatives. And that would undoubtedly diminish the influence of the great noble families, since part of their strength is also made up of spiritual beasts. Time passed, and the sun was almost completely gone on the horizon. Finally, it was time for the 4 groups of Minas to attack the criminals of the Yellow City. All of them had already infiltrated the city and were just waiting for the right moment for them to start the attack. Chapter 59. Attacking the Yellow City. 1. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The sun completely disappeared on the horizon, and it was time to start the mission against the bandits of the Yellow City. In one of the 2 entrances of the city, about 30 bandits were watching the place while they talked and drank. In that place, there was a 2-story building, which served as a checkpoint for those arriving in the city. However, the 3rd and 4th group of Minas had not passed through any of the official entrances to the Yellow City. This city had a considerable area, and the bandits could not check all locations in the city. So, Minas and his 2 teams entered through unattended regions to attract unwanted attention. At the same time, the 2 groups responsible for attacking the bandits located at the west and east entrance were already properly camouflaged in those points. Meanwhile, at one of the entrances to the city, the criminals were quietly passing the time, as they usually did on any other day, since they took command of this town. Hey, Don! Don! Wake up, man, you're always asleep when we're on duty. One of the bandits complained to a companion sitting on a sofa inside the control building. Oliver, don't worry about it. This guy has always been like this, but it won't make a difference whether he's awake or not. Another thug, holding a bottle of alcohol, said it out loud, smiling. Meanwhile, the 10 soldiers of Minas, who were charged with attacking this post, slowly began to move towards the enemy group. Guys, the enemy group has 30 cultivators. Of them, only 6 are in the 5th stage. They are at levels 40 and 41. The others are all between levels 34 and 38. We will attack them quickly, without giving space for them to join against us, said one of the soldiers, who was at level 40. Okay, whoever succeeds, help your teammates to finish the enemies faster. This will increase our speed. Let's start. Another soldier said he was one of the sergeant ranks in this group. It didn't take long, and the group began the attack on that checkpoint. At that moment, about 8 bandits were making the rounds of the place outside the building. When they saw the group of 10 people slowly approaching them, a bandit said out loud, "You guys, standing there. It is not allowed to enter or leave the Yellow City at night." However, when he expected the group of 10 people to stop their movements, the sharp side of a war hammer quickly approached his head. Seeing this, the bandit frowned and tried to defend himself against this sudden attack. At the same time, another bandit screamed when he felt a sharp spear going through his belly. Damn it! How can this guy be so fast? The bandit thought as he started to vomit large amounts of blood. Quickly, the sounds of battle could be heard outside the building while -10 soldiers massacred their enemies. Almost at the same time, one of the bandits who was drinking quietly in one of the rooms in that place abruptly got up from his chair and said it aloud. Did you hear that sound? It looks like there's something wrong going on out there, he said while having a strange look on his face. Another thug in the same room gave a big laugh and said, Did some fools decide to challenge us? But that is a good thing. Since we took this city, we have never had a good fight. Dexter, go see what's going on. Another thug said while looking at the man who was smiling. All right, boss. I will see that too. We haven't had any entertainment in this place for a while. Other thugs said as they started to follow in Dexter's footsteps. However, even before they left the building, the group slowly started to look paler. The moment Dexter passed through the exit door, a powerful attack swept over his neck, giving to the unprepared Dexter no time to defend himself. Swoosh! Dexter's head was quickly separated from the rest of his body. Instantly, blood started pouring down Dexter's neck while his head spun in the air, toward the ground. Dexter didn't even see what killed him. Seeing this, all the men who were about to leave the building took steps back. What had happened shocked them deeply, to the point that someone could hear the heartbeat of some of them loudly. Not only that, when they looked more closely at the exit door, they could see several bodies lying on the floor of that street. Enemy attack! Someone shouted with all his breath. It did not take long, and more than 15 criminals appeared quickly, heading towards the 10 soldiers of Minus, who were at the entrance to the building. One of these bandits, who had already reached level 40, asked with an ugly expression on his face. "Who are you? Why are you attacking us? Do you think our group cannot handle a small group like yours?" "Humph, dead people don't need to know anything." One of the soldiers snorted coldly as he activated his attack technique against the enemy. "You wretches, all of you will be killed when our reinforcements come." Another thug brandished loudly. Boom! It didn't take long, and an intense battle broke out at this checkpoint, leaving several mutilated bodies with each passing second. At the same time, all the other bandits that remained in this building came to join the fight. Zoom! Ah! Use all your strength and kill those bastards. The bandit leader shouted hoarsely. Whoosh! However, shortly after that, a blade of air sliced towards him. Damn it! I won't be able to dodge. He thought while preparing to activate his defensive technique with everything he could. Clang! Ah! The attack collided with the man's arms, slicing through his flesh and stopping at his bones. He barely managed to defend himself. How can this be? I am obviously stronger than these people. He murmured while he had a trickle of blood on his lips. By that time, Minus soldier group had already killed more than 20 bandits when the leader of the enemy band was finally killed on the spot. It can't be. The boss died. One of the subordinates thought as he defended himself from the attacks that were coming his way. Please don't kill me. I will surrender. One of them said in a weak voice. I'm sorry, but for the sake of our force, all of you must die. A soldier said, cutting towards the bandit's neck that had asked for mercy. He was just following Minus' orders, not to leave any enemies alive. As to why Minus had ordered that to be done, well, it was quite simple. If one of these bandits escaped or were released, he would likely bring problems to the Black Plains sooner or later. And at that point, the region governed by Minus was unable to face certain opponents, and because of that, they would not be taking unnecessary risks. As for the alternative ways of keeping these criminals silent, there were only two possibilities beyond death. One was slavery, and the other was the prison. For the first, Minus was completely opposed to enslaving people, even if they were scum from society. As for the second, Minus did not have enough structure or personnel to do so. The Black Plain needed all the people it had today to make things work well. So, Minus had no interest in sacrificing part of his people for the sake of criminals. From his perspective, these people should understand that their activities would kill them at some point, so he had no pity. After a few more minutes, the entire group of bandits, who were responsible for that entrance, was wiped out. Minus soldiers also took the opportunity and taken all the valuables that those people had with themselves. Minus had previously said that, apart from the techniques of Black Grade, everything else could be divided among the group of soldiers who were attacking those posts. We are going towards the center of the city. The other groups are likely to be almost done with their attacks. Come on. One of the soldiers at level 40 said after the group finished collecting the enemy's items. At the same time, when that entrance to the city was being attacked, the same was happening on the other side of the town. At that point, the fight was even more agitated since there were many opponents. However, Minus' group of soldiers still prevailed and defeated the bandits after almost half an hour of fighting. Of course, the advantage of the opponent's numbers did not have much effect against the soldiers of the Black Plain Army. That's because they all used black-grade techniques, while the bandits rarely had a single one like that. Because of this, even though they had to work harder than the attack group at the other entrance, they still managed to win a good victory. After that, it didn't take long, and the group from this entrance also headed towards the central part of the Yellow City, where the two main battles were taking place.